The difference between average and excellence is in how many times you're willing to strike. You have to be willing to strike this thing. Hit it again. Hit it again. How good do you want to do it? Go over it again. Strike it again. Strike it again. If you're going to have a song done with excellence, you can't sing it just one time. If you want a scripture done with excellence, you got to say it more than one time. You got to strike it. Strike it. You got to say it, learn it one time for yourself. You got to learn it one time for the people. You got to learn it one time for the folks that's going to scare it out of you. You got to strike it and strike it and strike it and strike it again and strike it and strike it. I'm not telling you something that I read out of a book. I'm just telling you that if whatever you want God to do in your life with excellence, with precision, and with confidence, you got to strike it over and over and over and over again. Are you listening? That you got to learn how to strike whatever God has given you in your hands to do. May I tell you that the best people in any field, listen to me carefully, the best people in any field are those people that devote many, many hours to what researchers call deliberate practice. Say deliberate practice. Deliberate practice. It's not haphazard practice. It is deliberate practice. And let me tell you, deliberate practice is when you have activity that is explicitly intended for improved performance. For improved performance. It's the kind of practice, when it's deliberate practice, it reaches for objectives that are beyond your current level of competence. It reaches beyond your current level of competence. That's deliberate practice. Deliberate practice also provides feedback. It provides feedback on the results. And then deliberate practice also, it involves high levels of repetition. High levels of repetition. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. If you go out and simply, for a golfer, if a golfer goes out and hits a bucket of balls to practice, he really won't get better, because most golfers do that just by hitting a bucket of balls. You got to do more than that. Just hitting a bucket of balls, that doesn't make golfers better. But here's what deliberate, you want to hear what deliberate practice in golf sounds like? It's taking an 8-iron and hitting the ball 300 times with an 80% tile of them being within 20 feet of the pin. It's being able to hit that and doing that for several hours. That's called deliberate practice, where you're working on something. You didn't just hit one little basket of balls. You have a deliberate thing of where I've got an 8-iron now, and I'm going to chip this thing, and my goal is to get 80% of these balls within 20 feet of the pin. Are you listening? That's deliberate practice. I'm going to do 300 of them, and 80% of them, I'm not satisfied until I get 80% of these within 20 feet of the pin. Are you listening? That's deliberate practice. You can't just do a practice and say that I have practiced. Listen, because excellence is never a mistake. You don't ever find anybody becoming excellent in anything on mistake. Michael Jordan, in playing basketball, I can't tell you how many times he'd get to a position on the court, and he did it so many times that it was locked into his muscle memory. Deliberate practice, striking it, striking it, striking it. Then you got somebody else that come up and, man, I want to be able to play like that. No, what you need to ask for is that I want to practice like that. I want deliberate practice like that. You want results like this person, but you're not willing to pray like they prayed. I mean, there are certain things that you just can't see developed in a person's life, and you see them on the platform in what they're able to do in 5 minutes, and think that you can just imitate them in 5 minutes, what you didn't see were the countless hours and days and weeks and months and years that it took them to get to that place to make it look easy. But it's because they had had deliberate practice. Because consistency is crucial. It is absolutely crucial. Elite performers in many diverse domains have found it to have incredible practice. On the average, roughly the same amount every day, including the weekends. They have consistent practice almost on a daily basis. And the evidence crosses a remarkable range of fields. In a study of a 20-year-old violinist, the best group that was judged by some conservatory teachers, the best group of them averaged 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. The next best group had 7,500 hours of deliberate practice. And then the poorest performing group of them had 5,000 hours of deliberate practice, of where you learn how to strike it over and over and over. It is the same, I don't care, the same story is true with those who are great in surgery, those who are great in insurance sales or any kind of sales position, those who are in virtually every sport. It is because they have learned to have deliberate practice of where you're striking it consistently. Every day you're working on this thing. Every day you're working on this thing. You know, when you go to somebody and they know how to throw down in the kitchen, grandma didn't just learn that last night. You know what I'm saying? They'd be cooking and you don't see grandmama with a measuring cup. Give me that buttermilk. Measuring cup for what? Give me this salt. Mama, it says you're supposed to use a fourth of a teaspoon. Mama know what a fourth of a teaspoon is. She don't need a fourth of a teaspoon to measure it out. She knows. And if it's not right, she'll whip it up and then she'll taste it. She said, that needs some more salt. And she knows how to do that. But let me tell you this, she didn't learn it last night. She done cooked a whole lot of that stuff. Many, many times she's had enough practice where you've done it enough to learn that this is how you do it. This is how you do it. Don't you hate it when you go somewhere to have some sweet tea and an amateur made it? Don't you just hate it when there's an inconsistency with it? You run in a place, I mean, you know, and I just hate it when I have to ask, well, who made the tea today? I'm like, is this your first time to the rodeo? Don't you know how to make sweet tea? Well, what are you, a Yankee? Listen, down in the South now, I'm a native. I'm a native Southern boy. We know how to make sweet tea. You really want to go Southern, we go get a piece of mint out the backyard and put it over in and put some lemon in it, you know. But there was such a consistency that you knew how to do it until it was right. You knew how to do it till it was right. But when you get an amateur that comes in and makes some weak tea, you can't even fix it. Adding sugar won't fix it. Adding more lemon won't fix it. If it's just weak, you can't fix it. You know why? Because they didn't let the tea leaves stay in contact with the water long enough. It didn't strike enough time. That's why you got to strike it, because you don't have the flavor that you need when you don't strike it. He's just telling the prophet here, the prophet has to tell the man of God, he's telling the president here, strike this thing. Not just 3 times, strike it until you kill it. Strike it until you decimate it. Strike it until you just annihilate this thing. Strike it, strike it, strike it, strike it until you wipe it out. It needs to be obliterated. Strike it, strike it. More deliberate practice equals better performance. It's a fact. More deliberate practice equals better performance. And tons of it equals great performance. In other words, the will to win means absolutely nothing without the will to prepare. The will to win means nothing without the will to prepare. And everybody said, I want to win, I want to win. But do you really want to win? Because you'll show how much you want to win by how much you're willing to prepare. That you will have deliberate practice to where it is targeted and it measures things and adjustments are made. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. If you practice it wrong 1,000,000 times, you'll have it perfectly wrong. That's why if you practice something and then you find out what's not right and what's rough, then you make the adjustments, you fix it in the practice stage, make the correction, and then you can actually make it incredibly, incredibly better. Jesus taught us the principle here in Luke chapter 16 and verse 10, that he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much, and he who is unjust in what is least is unjust also in much. He taught us the same basic principle in Matthew chapter 25, verse 21, where the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. So you see, we end up missing out on really, really great opportunities because of two reasons. You ready? We miss out on great opportunities because we dream too small. And number two, because we start too big. The only place you start out on top is when you're digging a hole. It's down here from there. Have you ever seen people with big dreams? You're supposed to have big dreams, but you're supposed to start small. Job chapter 8 verse 7 says, though thy beginning was small, yet thy latter end should greatly increase. Don't ever despise the day of small beginnings. See, you choke a baby by giving them a hunk of meat as the first little piece of solid food. You mess up when you start too big. Have big vision, but start small. Start small. If you're going to mess up something, mess up a little bit. Don't go and invest the little $25 that you have saved up over years. Don't invest that and that's your first time to the investment party. Start with a little. Start with a little. Start with a dime. Start with a nickel. Manage that one first. And then increase it. Always, we dream too small, and then we start too big. And it kills our opportunities. We end up messing up. How many times have you done something, and then you said to yourself, that's good enough? How many times have you done that? And then said to yourself, well, man, that's good enough. That's good enough. Do you really just want a mediocre spouse? Anybody, you just want somebody to say, you know, any woman, you just want to say, well, he'll do. You know who does that? Desperate women who have low self-esteem, who are pessimistic in their viewpoint, and maybe who haven't learned the tactics of attracting somebody on a different level. Brothers will do that the same way, you know, but it's a lag. Well, she's good enough. How would you like to find out that the only reason that you were chosen to be in somebody's life is because they said you will do? He okay, she okay. I guess I'll go with you, you okay. You want somebody to get lost in your eyes. Well, I can't live without you, baby. I don't even know how I was able to make it up to this point. I need you, baby. I need you. She'll do, she'll do. Do you really just want children that are just average in everything they do? Just average in everything they do? There ought to be something where they have a dominant gift where you ought to say, my baby. Now, you know, they may not be able to do everything well, but don't judge a fish by how well he can climb a tree. But put them in their element. Put them in their element. Let me get in my water, and then you judge me when I'm in my environment. and I'm doing things according to the way that I am built. Put me in my element. You put me in my element and I will make it do what it do. Some of you are frustrated because you're like a fish out of water and you're trying to be judged by a world system that is judging you when you are out of your element. How dare, that's what makes me sick about standardized tests. How dare you rate my intelligence of my mobility in climbing a tree when I'm made for the water? How dare you, if I am an eagle, you judge my ability if you put me in water when I'm designed for the air? I'm just saying all of this to say that you don't want just average stuff. There's an area, there's an arena where you dominate. I mean, if you are injured, don't just say, you know, God, just heal me just so I'm good enough to go back to work. Just heal me, Lord. Just give me enough healing so I can get off on the workman's comp. You have to ask yourself, are you giving up on things too soon that you ought to be striking until you have conquered it? See, because you can master practically anything that you want to master if you stick with it long enough. You know what Jeremiah said, Jeremiah 23 and verse 29, is not my word like a fire, says the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks the rock in pieces? And you know the only way that a hammer breaks the rock in pieces is not because you hit it one time, but because you strike it and strike it and strike it. There are some hard things that God's going to give you to come up against. You're going to have to butt against some things. You don't always break things loose and get your breakthrough the first time that you strike it. You've got to keep on striking it. Some things, listen to me carefully, some things have to be hammered out of your life. Other things have to be hammered into your life. That you got to have it hammered. You can't just do it one time. You can't just tell some folks one time. You got to hammer it in, hammer it in. Don't let anybody do you like that, baby. Don't let anybody do you like that, baby. Don't let anybody do you like. You got to. Don't never, you know, don't never let nobody make you a cripple. You remember Ray's mama told him that? Don't let nobody make you no cripple. Don't let nobody make you no cripple. Those words stuck with him. Don't let nobody make you no cripple. Don't let nobody make you a cripple. Your character is forged by a continual striking in your life. Consistency of what you do. I want to tell you, number one, strike hard. Learn to strike hard. Strike hard. Ecclesiastes 9:10 says, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with your might. Strike hard. Strike hard. Strike hard. Whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your might. Number two, strike fast. Strike fast. Revelation chapter 22 and verse 7 says, behold, I'm coming quickly. This is Jesus talking. He says, blessed is he who keeps the words of the prophecy of this book. He said, but I'm coming quickly. You have to strike fast. Strike fast. Strike fast. May I remind you that delayed obedience is disobedience? And then when you don't strike quickly enough, you can miss an opportunity that God has sent your way. And then the third thing here is to strike steady. Strike steady. Strike steady. 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58 says, therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing that your labor is not in vain in the Lord. Strike steady, strike steady, strike steady, 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 strike it. Keep on hitting it. Keep on hitting it. In other words, don't you give up on what God has assigned you to do. When God has given you something to tackle, don't be discouraged because you didn't get your breakthrough the first go round. You might have to file an appeal. Are you listening to me? Don't you dare give up. Don't you dare give up. When God puts a fight in you, fight through, fight through, fight through. You hold that thing tenaciously like a bulldog. Their face is slanted back so they can hold on and still breathe. You're not supposed to just give up. I want you to ponder the 8 continues in the New Testament. Jesus said in John 8:31, continue in my word, then are ye my disciples indeed. Continue in my word. Secondly, he said continue in my love, John 15. Continue in my love. He said let brotherly love continue. These are critical things that you should never give up on. Continue in my word. Always stay steadfast to the word of God. Continue in my love. Continue in my love. Then he says, let brotherly love continue. See, it's one thing to continue in God's love. It's another thing to continue in the love that you should have for one another. Let brotherly love continue. Then another, he says, continue in the grace of God. Acts chapter 13. Continue in the grace. Don't ever give up on God's grace. Continue in the grace of God. Then he says in Acts chapter 14, verse 22, and Colossians chapter 1, verse 23, continue in the faith. Continue in the faith. Continue in the faith. Continue in the faith. And then Romans chapter 11 talks about continuing in his goodness. Continue in his goodness. Continue in God's goodness. Continue in his goodness. Then Colossians chapter 4 and verse 2 says continue in prayer. Continue in prayer. And then 1 Timothy chapter 2 verse 15 says, continue in faith, charity, and holiness with sobriety. These are the 8 continues of the New Testament. These are critical things that you should never ever give up on. You continue in the word. You continue in his love. You continue in the love for the brethren. You continue in the grace of God. Continue in faith. Continue in his goodness. Continue in prayer. Continue in faith and in charity and holiness with sobriety. Continue. Don't ever give up on these things. And may I just remind you that to continue requires no special talent. It requires no unusual education, no exceptional biblical knowledge, no intellectual superiority. It only requires one thing to continue: obedience. 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 And may I say this to you, never quit something with great long-term potential just because you can't deal with the stress of the moment. Never, ever quit something with great long-term potential just because you can't deal with the stress of the moment. Please remember that your current condition is not your concrete conclusion. Don't stop short. You keep pressing. Seth Godin said that the opposite of quitting is rededication, an invigorated new strategy designed to break the problem apart. Good enough is just baseline living, marked by mediocrity, by being stuck in spiritual survival mode and being controlled by complacency. Good enough gets you stuck in stagnation. But God has greater in store for you. Greater works than these shall you do. And you need 3 things, and I'm finished: confidence, clarity, and courage. You need confidence. Confidence to know that nothing is impossible with God. Confidence to know that nothing is impossible with God. You need clarity to understand the next step that God is calling you to take. Faith is not seeing the whole end of the journey, it's just seeing the next step that you need to take. Clarity to say the next step. I don't know what 25 steps may be down the road, but clarity says I know the next step that I'm supposed to take. Clarity. You need confidence that all things are possible with God. You need clarity to know the next step that you should take, and you need courage to do anything that God tells you to do. You need courage to obey him. You need courage to stick to what God has given you to do. Courage to just say, Lord, I'm willing to do whatever it is that you call me to do. Don't you dare stop short by just striking something 3 times when you know that every time you strike it, you're getting better. That every time that God is conquering this, that every time that I refuse to give up this thing, that when I strike this thing again in prayer, I am killing this addiction that almost took me out. You're saying that I'm not going to let this thing, I'm going to attack this thing with everything that I've got on the inside of me. I'm going to attack it with everything that I've got. I'm going to attack it with everything that I've got. And I want you to know that there are some things that you're supposed to continue in. And I pray that God has spoken to you about some things that you might have just been saying, you know, Lord, it's good enough. Good enough never gets the attention of people who have the ability to promote you. If you're just good enough, I guarantee you, you'll be the last hired and the first fired. Good enough will not bring you the kind of pride that you really want in your children to just say, well, it's good enough. God wants your best, nothing more, nothing less than your best. Than your best. You need to ask yourself the question, have I done my best here? And am I having a deliberate practice in my daily life? Deliberate practice. If you're going to become an exceptional person. Here was a father trying to tell King Joash, strike it. He didn't tell him how many times, but he said, strike. He said, every arrow that you have, this arrow is the Lord's deliverance. Strike it. And he stopped short. And how much more could we have done if we had only taken what was in our hand and struck it another time? If you'd gone through some more practice, if you've made it as good as you can get it, if you've given that thing your all, if you've gone over it again, you can do better. Whatever it is, you can improve it. You can make it better. Learn from your mistakes and make it better the next time. You can be better athletically. You can be better intellectually. You can be better spiritually. You can be better financially. I'm just telling you, there's something that you've got to learn how to strike. You've got to learn how to strike it. Start where you are. Use what you've got and do all you can. Strike! Strike! Strike. And when you strike, it is the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. It's the arrow of the Lord's deliverance, even though he put it in your hand. It was the rod of Moses. But after a while, it became the rod of the Lord. It was a sword of Gideon's, but after a while, it became the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. That's something that he's put in your hand that's designed to be able to make a strike until it decimates the enemy that is trying to come against your life.
Thank you for watching Power for Living with Bishop Dale C. Bronner. Join us again next time for Power for Living, where revelation is power. Power for living.